Hello, AP Stat students, and welcome to the College Board virtual instruction for AP Statistics. On our very final lesson, we've got two instructors with you today. How are you doing over there, Mr. Murphy?
I'm doing fine, Luke, or Mr. Wilcox. I'll use both interchangeably. Luke and I have known each other for probably the better part of 5 or 7 years. Luke, tried to figure out the day we met in Chicago. I remember the day we met, and I remember what we were doing, but I can't remember the date. And I looked through my whatever, and I couldn't find it. But yeah, doing well up here in Bangor, Maine, Mr. Wilcox. I was telling Luke before we started, I mowed my lawn today. And tomorrow I'm going to maybe be shoveling. We're going to get some snow up here in Maine. So welcome to Maine. But we're really excited to kind of finish here today and wind down. And we had a great time. But I'll send it back to Mr. Wilcox and we'll get rolling here.
Yeah, we actually talked on the phone yesterday, and I think both Mr. Murphy and myself are feeling a little bit sort of bummed out that this is the end of it. But we definitely have an excellent lesson planned for you today. We're going to give you hopefully some good insight that will help you on AP exam day on May 22nd. So let's just go ahead and jump right into things here. Check to make sure we're in the right location here. Hopefully you're AP Stats student and you recognize both of us. And at this point, I hope that you're familiar with us and you know, of course, that Mr. Murphy is from Maine and that I am from Michigan. And I'm being thankful now for my 45 degrees and sunny right now, Mr. Murphy.
Yep, we'll take it. It's windy and cold today, and tomorrow the wood stove's going back on.
So here is our plan for today's lesson. We are going to first start by giving you what we have put together as our top 10 AP exam tips with some details within each one of those top 10 AP exam tips. And then after that, we are going to share some AP exam predictions. Certainly, Mr. Murphy and I don't really know what's going to show up on the AP exam, but we have a couple of thoughts about what might show up or what we would like to show up. And then we've got a little bit of a video montage to end the lesson today. So I am going to take you through the first 5 of the top 10 AP exam tips, and then I will pass it over to Mr. Murphy to handle the next 5. So here we go. AP exam tip number 1 is to clearly communicate your understanding. So I always tell my students that in AP statistics, it is not just about getting the correct answer. It is about being able to explain your reasoning and your thinking and how you arrived at that final answer. And in fact, when you look at the instructions on the AP exam for the free response, this is what you're going to see on May 22nd. It's going to say, show all your work, indicate clearly the methods you use because you will be scored on the correctness of your methods, as well as on the accuracy and completeness of your results and explanations. So what does that mean? Well, one thing that means is that you don't want to just have a final answer. You're going to have to communicate that understanding in a variety of different ways, which could be formulas, could be calculations, could be words, and that's going to depend on the question. You know, if it's a binomial calculation, you're going to need to show a formula or some numbers there. But there's going to be a lot of questions where you're going to have to explain in words, especially on this 2020 exam, which is open book, open note. I think you're going to tend to see more questions where you're going to have to explain yourself in words. Next up here is that a correct answer with no work most often will not earn full credit. So, you know, Mr. Murphy and I have been AP exam readers for a long time, and quite often you'll get students that have the correct answer there, but they're only getting partial credit, or they may not even be getting any credit at all. We typically call that a naked answer when it doesn't have any supporting work. So you want to make sure that you're providing that supporting work for your final answer. And then the next thing, write what you need and then be done. We do have some students that have this habit of going on and on and on and writing more and more, hoping that somewhere the correct answer is in that response. And the truth of it, as an AP exam reader, is if we have 2 different proposed solutions that a student has presented, we look at those as what's called parallel solutions. And it is our job to grade the weaker of the 2 parallel solutions. So listen, say what you need to say, answer the question, and then just be done. Don't continue to carry on and on, because there's a chance that you could make some sort of statistical error in that reasoning as you continue to write more and more. Okay, up next, AP exam tip number 2, and I'm sure you've been hearing this from both myself and Mr. Murphy, is that you got to include context in AP stats. And so where are you going to see that? A couple of classic locations where you're going to want to make sure you include that. One is if you are asked to describe a distribution. And hopefully at this point, you know of the big ideas that you want to talk about here, which would be, you know, shape, outlier, center, and then some sort of measure of variability, but you got to include context. So you can't just say the distribution is skewed right. You need to say something like the distribution of aspen tree diameters is skewed to the right, and that'll take care of your context. Now, another place you'll see it a lot is if you're asked to describe the relationship between two quantitative variables or even two categorical variables. A lot of times students will just say that there is a positive relationship between the two variables. Well, we need some context in there. There's a positive relationship between GPA and SAT score. So include the context of whatever the variable is there. And then as a third idea here, I always tell my students that it is inappropriate language, and I don't want you to use that language in AP statistics because I need to know what it represents. So the classic example of this, when we're studying normal probability plots, is for students to say, it is approximately normal because it is linear. And I need to know what those its represent. So it may be the distribution of female heights is approximately normal because the normal probability plot is fairly linear. So make sure that you don't use the word it as a general rule. Okay, up next, tip number 3 is to be specific in your language. So this is about the words that you choose to use as you write up your responses. And after many, many years of reading AP exams, we've found that there are students that will sometimes use the sort of English meaning of a word rather than the statistical meaning of the word. And so I've listed a few of them here that get thrown around a lot by students, like significant, accurate, skewed, biased. All of those 4 terms have very specific meanings in AP statistics, and you should only be using those terms if you're referring to those particular statistical concepts. So when you're saying significant, that should mean that the results are unlikely to happen purely by chance. If you're saying accurate, you might be talking about a sampling method where the truth is at the center of the sampling distribution. If you're saying skewed, you don't want to say something like the data are skewed. You want to be talking specifically about the shape of a distribution as being skewed. And then biased is a term that we technically use for sampling methods, which will consistently overestimate or consistently underestimate the true value. So some very specific examples of mistakes that students often make that often the rubric will actually have written in that students would get marked down if they use the incorrect statistical term. So stratified versus blocking. In both cases, you're taking some big group of individuals and you're splitting them into some sort of groups, right? The difference here is that the term stratified sampling is used when you are taking a sample from a population, whereas the term blocking is used when you are setting up an experiment. So make sure that you choose the correct term there. Another one that students struggle with is the idea of accuracy versus precision. Precision is about variability, right? If it's precise, then there is low variability, and the accuracy has more to do with the true value that you're trying to estimate being at the center of the sampling distribution. And then one other one here that students sometimes struggle with is the idea of population distribution versus sampling distribution versus sample distribution. And here's the big difference. A population distribution is going to show you all of the individuals within the population. A sampling distribution is going to show you all of the possible samples from that population where some statistic is being calculated from each one of those samples. And then when we say sample distribution, that's actually just referring to one sample. So sampling distribution is all of the possible samples. Sample distribution is one possible sample. So don't say sample distribution when you really mean to say sampling distribution. Okay, AP exam tip number 4, very important on the AP exam, is that you got to use the right notation. And most often you're going to see this in the difference between statistics and parameters. So just a quick note about symbols. The statistics that you're most commonly going to see are p hat for a proportion, X bar for a mean, and S for a standard deviation. Now, all three of those statistics are trying to estimate a parameter for the whole population, and those parameters would be P, which is the true proportion for the whole population, mu, which is the true mean for the whole population, and sigma, which is the true standard deviation of the population. So make sure you have all your notation straight. Next up is to make sure that you define parameters. So I'm thinking very specifically about writing hypotheses for a significance test. If you define the null hypothesis as being P1 minus P2 is equal to 0, you better tell me what P1 and P2 represent in the context of the problems. Be sure to define your parameters. And then, of course, another big one, if you're trying to calculate a test statistic for a significance test, you need to be very clear on whether that is a z-test statistic or a t-test statistic. And by now, I hope that you know that a z-test statistic is used when you are doing inference for proportions, whereas a t-test statistic is used when you are doing inference for means. And that's because we typically don't know the standard deviation of the population, and we have to estimate that with the standard deviation of the sample. So we use S in order to estimate sigma. AP exam tip number 5, and this is very important for the 2020 AP exam, is you gotta get your workspace ready. So number 1, you have to know where you're going to be taking this test on May 22nd. So you got to have a room picked out in your house, have space set out there so that you know that's going to be the place where you're going to be working. You're definitely going to want to have your formula sheet and your tables printed out or maybe pulled up on the computer, but accessible to you within your workspace. And very important here, make sure you're printing out the 2020 formula sheet because it is a new formula sheet for this year. You definitely want to have your calculator ready to go. While the College Board has said that all of the questions will be able to be done without a fancy statistical calculator, it's certainly not going to hurt at all to have your calculator there handy just in case you need it for something. And then finally, this is just one of my suggestions here. A lot of research which suggests that if you study something in a certain location, that you're more likely to be able to recall or retain that information later if you're in the same spot. So let's just make sure that like that room you've designated for the AP exam, you don't want to be going into that room for the first time on May 22nd. You want to spend some time in there ahead of time. So that takes us through the first 5 AP exam tips. I am now going to pass it over to Mr. Murphy. He's going to talk through the next 5 AP exam tips with you.
Great. Thanks, Mr. Wilcox. Give me just a second here. Okay, so those were excellent. And Mr. Wilcox and I have had many phone calls and emails over the last 6 weeks, and we agreed on just about everything. So that was really nice. So you need to manage your time for this test, no different than any other test, but this one will probably feel more like a classroom test to you. So we need you to log in 30 minutes early, and one of the slides towards the end is kind of the big 5 things to check off before test day, like the AP demo. We talked about that, I think, a little bit yesterday. So you want to be in your room, as Luke said, sort of ready to go with everything there. Pre-response question number 1 will be 25 minutes. We had on Monday and Wednesday the timers, which was really cool. We're recommending that you spend those full 25 minutes putting your answer together, and there's 3 options as to how you can submit your answer. At the 5-minute mark, so the timer will start at actually 30 minutes, and it will count down. At 5 minutes, it turns from black to red. And that's when you really want to start thinking about uploading your answer. You know, if you need another 20 seconds to finish up your last answer, that's perfectly fine, or to read through your answers one more time, that's fine. But we really want to give you want to give yourself that full 5 minutes, I think. Once that's uploaded and the 30 minutes is over, you can download free response question number 2, which will be 15 minutes with a 5 minutes to upload. Again, similar to what you did on Monday and Wednesday. The timer will be 20 minutes, and when it gets to 5 minutes, it will turn to red. And please, we really don't want you working for 29 minutes and 19 minutes. You want to give yourself plenty of time to upload your answers. Don't spend too much time on any one part of a problem. You know, we'll make some predictions, but Luke and I think that the first 25-minute problem will have, you know, parts A through F or something like that. And the second question will have parts A through E Again, we're just speculating. We don't know for sure. But you don't want to spend 15 minutes on part A. That's probably just not going to be good time management. Watch the clock timer on the exam. When it turns red, you'll have 5 minutes to upload your answers. So we talked about that. So you can have a watch, you know, on yourself or in the room, whatever. You really want to kind of just plan out your timing as best you can. Okay, tip number 7, never leave anything blank. You can't get any credit for a blank answer. So don't stress if you struggle on 1 or 2 parts. You can still earn a 5. You know, this is a modified exam and it's going to be shorter. And there's probably going to be 1 or 2 parts perhaps that you don't like as much, and that's okay. Every year I take the AP Stats exam, I struggle with certain parts. So don't let that bother you. If you walk through a part and part C you don't like, keep going and read D and E and F or whatever, and try and answer every part, even if you're not 100% comfortable with that. Partial answers earn partial credit. Luke said naked answer. I like the term bald answer. I don't know if that's because I don't have as much hair as I used to, and my students really love it. Every time I say bald answer, they all point at me and say, you know, was that your saying? And no, I think that's just a saying that's been around long before I started teaching. But you know, complete answers in context, show us your work. Luke and I have been saying that every day for the last 6 weeks. There is no penalty for guessing. So if you really don't know how to do a probability problem, you know, put an answer down. You know, look at the 2A table and see if you can find 2 numbers that perhaps make sense. There is no penalty for guessing, and you might sometimes earn partial credit for something. So show us work for all sections, even if you don't really know how to do it. If you were stuck on one part and need the answer for the next part, make up a reasonable answer. So if you don't know how to do a probability in part B, and you think you need that for, you know, trying to show independence in part C and it's still probability, make up an answer. The readers have to work with you and read your answers. We continue with the problem with your mathematics. Now the reasonable, that's the key word, right? You can't say the probability is 14.3. That doesn't make sense. Probability is between 0 and 1. So, but we need to read with the student. That's the term we use at the AP Stats reading. So we'll look, you know, we'll follow every one of your lines. And if you're, you know, make a mathematical mistake or something, or typo or copy error in part B, we carry that down in C, and you may not lose any points other than what you didn't do correct in part B. So I thought that was a good idea. Attempt all parts of the problem. I think I mentioned that earlier. You might be able to do parts C and D, for example, even if you don't like or fully understand parts A and B. So never give up on a problem. I tell my students, never give up on a problem. You may not like how the problem starts out, and then all of a sudden, as you're walking through it, it may make more sense, or you read part C and something tips you off and says, oh, I think I can go back and do part A. Both Luke and I stressed that, you know, early this week when we were doing mock exams, each of your 2 free response questions will have at least 2 of the 4 major themes or threads in AP Stats. So expect that. Some of the FRQs you've probably been doing all year with your teachers, you know, the whole problem could have been probability or experimental design or something. This year, you're going to see at least 2 of those 4 major themes or thread in each problem. So expect that. Know your formula sheet. As Luke said, there is a new formula sheet this year. Hopefully you've been using it all year with your teachers. They added some content to this year's exam, and hopefully your teachers went through that with you. The geometric random variables, standard deviation, and standard error. Some of those formulas, honestly, are a little hard to understand. Luke and I were talking about that yesterday. This year's formula sheet, almost all of us really like it, much better than the old one. So make sure that you're getting this year's formula sheet. And as Luke said earlier, you know, print that up ahead of time. Of course, you can have your own formula sheet. So some of my students have said, Mr. Murphy, I want to write down every single formula for confidence intervals with means and proportions, 1 and 2 samples. That's perfectly fine. That's okay. So again, this year the rules were a little different, and many times I think when my students put together these note sheets or note cards or whatever, they like to call them cheat sheets, and I don't like that term because they're not cheating. I think it helps them study for the test, perhaps more than help them on the test. But sometimes, students like to have it there, and if it's a security blanket, that's great. Be able to find the formula if you need one on that formula sheet quickly. As Luke said earlier, the binomial probability, that formula is a little bit hard perhaps to memorize, but you want to know right where it is. Okay, it's on page 1 about halfway down, or something to that effect. So spend some time between now and the 22nd with your formula sheet. Know which table is used when. So table A, again, I like to call that a Z table in my classroom, but on the formula sheet, it's called table A. And then of course, table B, sometimes called the T table. So different teachers have their way of identifying those tables. You can use table A and you can use table B. If you used table C earlier this year, or right at the end of the the course with your teacher before we all went home, that's actually the chi-squared table, and you won't need that. It's that those topics are not on this year's exam. So if you have those 3 tables, don't worry about it, but you might want to just cross out the chi-squared table because you won't need it on this year's exam. Okay, tip number 9, know your inference. Inference is 35 to 40% of a typical AP Stats exam. Of course, this year's a little bit different, but I think Luke and I are reasonably confident, no pun intended, that you're going to get some inference, perhaps on both problems. So feel comfortable with confidence intervals and hypothesis test 1 and 2 samples and all the things that we were doing earlier in some of our sessions. So are we dealing with means or proportions? I like to ask my student, what highway are we getting on? We can get on the mean highway or the proportion highway. Once we get on that highway, we almost never get off that highway. Are we dealing with 1 or 2 samples? Are we doing a confidence interval or a significant or hypothesis test? Sometimes the wording in the problem makes it crystal clear. You're going to run a test, or come up with a 95% confidence interval or something like that. Paired t-test or sample t-test. So when Mr. Wilcox and I were talking yesterday, I actually really liked this bullet. This is not one of the 4 questions that I like to ask. If you sat through any of my hypothesis testing sessions, I like to ask these 4 questions. And I think I'm going to make it a 5th question now. There is a difference between a paired t-test and a 2-sample t-test. So make sure that you understand or know the difference. And then finally, are you going to read a Z table or a T table? Again, if you use the calculator and you've been using the calculator all year, I would be consistent with that. Each teacher has kind of their own philosophy about teaching tables versus not teaching tables, and we won't go into that today. But if you're comfortable with tables, use tables, and if you're comfortable with your calculator, you use your calculator. Okay, and finally, tip number 10: be confident and be ready. Take a practice exam to increase your confidence. Well, we offered 2 of them this week. And that was actually twice what we originally thought we were going to do about 2 weeks ago. Mr. Wilcox and I went to a training with the College Board, and they were talking about, 1 25-minute question on one day and then a 15-minute on the second day. And they actually decided to run 2 full tests. So there are 2 full tests. And hopefully, if you haven't been able to do those, please walk through those. I think that's going to be, some of the best prep that you can do. You have already done the hard work. That's the way I tell my students. You've been working hard, hopefully from August or September. I like to say you've done the heavy lifting, right? So if you've been watching us on YouTube, we've gotten lots and lots of great positive feedback from many students and teachers, and we sincerely appreciate it. But I like to tell my students, you've done all the hard work now. You're in shape. Let's go to the big game. Let's go to the test on the 22nd and walk into that test feeling confident. So I'm going to talk about the next, I'll go to the next slide. And we'll talk about the 5 super important steps to get you ready for the AP exam. And look at this exam as a way to show how much you've learned all year. You've already done all the hard work. So I make the comparison with some of my students. You might work out all summer, for your sport, field hockey or basketball or football, and it's fun to play in the championship game. That should be fun, right? So I like to tell my students, this should be fun. You've worked hard. This is your opportunity to prove to yourself and your hopefully college or whatnot, your parents, that you've worked hard and you know how to do this. And this is a great class. And I think you're going to reap the benefits when you get to college. So Again, I think we've both shown you this slide a couple times. This is the College Board slide about these sort of 5 steps that you really want to do before test day. So try the exam demo. I think that came out on Monday, the 4th this week. I made my students do it, and they said, very helpful, Mr. Murphy, thanks. There's a little checklist. You want to make sure that, before test, you've followed this checklist and you've done everything on there. Confirm your email address. That's super important. I guess you're going to get a little e-ticket or number or something, and again, this is brand new to us too. Make sure you have that. And I think we talked earlier about checking in sort of 30 minutes early. So again, you can go to this link right over here, cb.org/AP2020, get ready, and you can find this slide as well. So I'm going to send this back to Mr. Wilcox here, and we're going to make some predictions, right?
Yeah, so this is something that I do every year with my own students, and you got to be careful with predictions, because the reality is, I'll tell you right up front, some of these predictions that Brendan and I have talked about, we're going to be right on some of these, but we're also going to be wrong on some of these too, I think. And so take it with a grain of salt, but I just think here's some ideas or some things to think about as we move into this sort of special year 2020 AP exam. So first thing, and Mr. Murphy mentioned this already, is in terms of the length, well, we know question number 1 is going to be a little bit longer. It's 25 minutes. Question number 2 is 15 minutes. And so we're expecting, maybe 5 or 6 parts in question number 1, and I'd say 4 to 5 parts in question number 2. The next prediction here is one that we tried to highlight when we went through our practice exams, but it's the idea that each question is going to possibly span the entirety of the whole course. You may start out with one variable analysis like you did at the beginning of the year, and by the end of it, you're doing a significance test. So you just have to be prepared to be able to jump from one content area to the next within the same context, because it's very likely that you're going to see that in both of the questions, both with number 1 and number 2. And so we're expecting that all of the units 1 through 7, or a majority of those units, are going to be covered within these 2 questions, and making sure that units 8 and 9 are not covered on the 2020 AP exam. So this is where we're getting more into the opinions of the predictions, but I think that it's likely that one of those 2 questions will be on the highway of means, and one will be on the highway of proportions. If the exam is to cover everything that we did in the course, I just sort of feel like you got to be on both of those highways. And so it makes sense to me that one question would be on one and one question would be on the other. Another thing that we just think here, like one of the big ideas in AP statistics is inference. And we know that there's 2 big ideas underneath that umbrella of inference, which is confidence intervals and significance tests. So it seems reasonable that you're going to see both of those on the AP exam within those 2 questions. Now, how are they going to be included? We don't really know that. So when we say there's going to be a confidence interval question, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to construct a confidence interval. You might have to interpret a confidence interval. You might have to calculate the margin of error. You might have to explain what the 95% confidence level means. We don't know exactly, but certainly there's going to be a confidence interval somewhere in those 2 questions. Likewise, you're going to see a significance test, and we don't know what you're going to be asked to do. You might be asked to write out the hypotheses for the significance test. You might be asked to check a condition or explain why we check a condition. You may do some calculation for a test statistic or a p-value, or you might be asked to make a conclusion at the end of a significance test. So we don't know exactly what the specific question is going to be, but definitely you can expect a confidence interval of some sort and a significance test of some sort on the AP exam. And then this is another big guess here, but in terms of 1 sample versus 2 sample, it seems reasonable to me that one question would be a 1 sample scenario, and one of the questions would be a 2 sample scenario. And sort of along those lines, I think that it's likely that there'd be one where there's some sort of sample being taken, and then one where there's an experiment that's being done. And so it could be that the experiment, randomly assigns into 2 groups, and that becomes your 2 sample problem. And then the sampling problem is going to, potentially be your 1 sample problem there. So the next thing that we're going to do here for our AP exam predictions is to think about personally, like what topic would we really like to see on the AP Stats exam this year? So Brendan, I'll pose this question to you first. Do you have any sort of like favorites or maybe like ideas that you think might show up on the AP exam on this 2020 year?
Sure. So I think it was last Friday, Luke, that FRQ Friday. I think two of my three problems had what I like to call a generic computer output. So we did a lot of problems where we were coming up the least squares regression line, or maybe r squared, something like that. And the reason I say that is because, as Luke mentioned earlier, this year's test is calculator neutral. I think the term we're using is agnostic, meaning if you have one, use it. You do whatever you can on that calculator, what you've done all year. We also understand from an equity point of view that certain students are not going to have a calculator. And so the test development committee, I believe, is going to try and write an exam where the calculator, if you have it, great, you can use it. But if you don't have it, you can still do the exam and probably do well. Perhaps something with a geometric probability. That sort of topic was expanded a little bit in the curriculum this year. And, sometimes when we add a topic, we like to test it, and I think my last one, Luke, is I like to say to the kids, expect the unexpected. No matter how many years I've taught the course, and no matter how good I think I'm getting at making predictions, they're just wild predictions. And the test development committee is some super knowledgeable folks, half high school, half college, and they come up with year after year after year. I just take my hat off to them and say, wow, they came up with a great test again this year. So perhaps expect one part of one of the problems to be challenging and maybe a little bit different, and that's okay. We talked about you can still get a 4 or 5, even if you don't get every part of every problem right. So I think the test development committee this year, Luke, will again come up with a great test, and I'm excited to see it on whenever it's released. But I bet you there's something in there that you and I haven't talked about, and so, but if it's in units 1 to 7, it's fair game. So those are my predictions.
Excellent, good predictions. I like throwing the geometric probability calculation in there. That'd be interesting to see. For me, I think in terms of the significance test, they can't ask students to do an entire significance test. The part that I think is going to show up is in the conditions, checking the conditions. But I actually don't think that it's going to be about checking conditions. I think it's going to be about explaining why we check those conditions. So in my classroom, I call it the so what of each one of the conditions. So, for example, you check the random condition where you have a random sample or random assignment. Well, you can check that very easily by checking the wording of the question usually. But I think the so what is more important. Like, why do we check the random condition? Well, we want a random sample so that we can generalize to some larger population from which we sampled. And we want random assignment in an experiment so that we can show some sort of causation, right? So I think that so what might show up. Then you've also got the 10% condition, which is fairly easy to check. But the reason we're checking that is because we're sampling without replacement. And we want to be convinced that, or at least be able to assume that independence between each one of the trials. And then finally, the third condition, the large counts condition or the large sample condition, we can very easily check those. But the reason why we check those is because we want to know that the sampling distribution is approximately normal, because then that's ultimately going to help us to calculate a p-value for a significance test. So I think that there's a decent chance that one of those parts is going to be about explaining why we check those 3 conditions there. Okay, Brendan, I've got another question for you here.
Sure.
And this is now, we're approaching the end of YouTube Live. And so you think back about this whirlwind of the last 6 weeks and what we've done in the last 6 weeks. And so give me something that you're going to remember, a year from now, 2 years from now, what will you remember from this whole YouTube experience?
So I couldn't come up with just one, Luke, but I have a couple. And it's really hard to teach students or adults or anyone when you have no feedback. We're sitting here in my bedroom upstairs in Bangor, Maine, and we're live and we're talking to thousands of students, and I have no idea whether anyone's understanding what I'm saying. And so I've been struggling with that in a good way. This has been a real challenge for me as a teacher, to come up with in 45 minutes some questions and some slides to talk about a topic, experimental design, that maybe I would spend 3 weeks in the classroom with, So I that's been a challenge, but sort of fun. Technology at times, Luke, can be challenging to me. There was one day where I had a little power surge or something. We've lost power 3 times in Maine in the last 6 weeks or something. It's just been one of those end of winters. And I got an error message on my screen that said, "You are no longer presenting." Well, I guess I was still presenting, and I'm literally staring at the screen for 15 seconds or so. And I'm sure the students watching me says, what's wrong with Mr. Murphy? This guy's just staring away, So technology can be frustrating. That being said, isn't technology cool? This we couldn't have done this 10 or 15 years ago. No way, no way. And I guess I was blown away by the number of students that have gone on to YouTube and checked us out, even if it was for a few minutes. So we had no idea when we went into this, Luke, like, I thought a couple hundred kids a day, maybe. I had no idea. And I think we've reached a much bigger pool of AP students, and that's super cool. So I appreciate the opportunity. I've become such a better teacher. I'm going to bring these lessons back to my classroom, at Little John Baptist High School in Bangor, Maine, 500 kids. I'm going to be a better teacher. I'm going to be able to explain things better. And I'm a little better with technology than I was before. 3 months ago, I had heard Zoom, but I didn't really know what it meant, and breakout rooms. And these are now words that we're all using. So it's been a great experience, challenging on some level, but just a ton of fun too. And we really appreciate all of you guys, listening in. And we've gotten some really nice emails from both teachers and students. And so we're glad we helped. How's that? So what about you, Luke? What did you take away from this, or what did you learn?
Yeah, well, you actually sort of hit on it right at the end there. This whole idea of students and teachers reaching out to us, to both Mr. Murphy and myself, through email, Facebook, Twitter. It's just been awesome to see that people have been tuning in. They've been checking it out, and the reason why personally that feels so good is because as an AP Stats teacher, when I first started doing this thing, I had no clue what I was doing. I was not a good AP Stats teacher in my first couple of years. And I met a lot of awesome AP Stats teacher, and the community of AP Stats teachers is just incredible.
No.
And they have helped me over the last 15 years to become a much better AP statistics teacher. And I really feel like this has been an opportunity for us to give a little bit back to the community, to help teachers out, to help students out. And to get that feedback from teachers and students that it's been helpful, that just ultimately feels really, really good. And then one last thing, we had to build all these lessons, and I had to build this lesson for power and type 1 error and type 2 error. And I made it about the probability of contracting the senioritis 20 virus. And to me, I just thought that was hilarious. But like you said, because we don't have any feedback, who knows if anybody caught my joke or liked my joke. But to me, that was one of the better lessons, was the senioritis 20 virus, which I'm sure some of these students definitely have caught that virus. So, all right, well, we are approaching the end here. I do have something that I want to show everybody here. My children really wanted to celebrate this last day of YouTube. And so they've made something for the students here that I want to show them. I don't know if you can read it here, but they made cupcakes for today. This is the celebration of the end of YouTube, and it's kind of hard to see there, but it says "Go AP Stats." So we're gonna eat some cupcakes today to celebrate the end of the YouTube here. But any last sort of final parting words you got there, Mr. Murphy?
Again, just a real sincere thanks to all the students and teachers who have sat and listened to us and put up with my lack of technology skills and perhaps my stupid jokes and my funny accent. I'm actually from the Boston area, and sometimes I throw a little bit of Maine accent in there, and it's really hard. I'm sure some of you pick up certain words when I say, park your car or something like that. That's just the way I talk, right? So some of you may be saying, where is this guy from? But sincerely, we appreciate all the hard work you've done. This has been an awesome experience. This is going to go down, Luke, is one of my, top 10 experiences. And we've been readers and we've done workshops and we've had some just awesome experiences, over our careers. But I'm going to remember this. So So best of luck. Please be safe. Please take care of yourselves and your families. Stay positive. We're going to get through this by community, and it's really nice. I live in small town Maine, and the neighbors are all out. We're all talking to each other across the street, social distancing. So be positive, keep working hard. 2 weeks from today, I think you'll be still typing up that second FRQ if my time is right, or Eastern Standard Time. So best of luck. Really appreciate all of your hard work. We hope we've helped, and thanks for all the wonderful emails. We'll be thinking of you on the 22nd.
Yeah, definitely. So when you wake up on that AP exam day on May 22nd, I think you can know for sure that Mr. Murphy and myself, we are going to be like there rooting for you. Wherever you are in the country, taking that AP exam on your computer, you can know that definitely we're behind you. We want you to do well, and we know you're going to do well. So the final thing that we're going to share with you today is a little bit of a montage of some of the AP Live sessions that have been done from all the different subject areas. But I'm going to ask that you try to pay close attention and see if you can locate both Mr. Murphy and myself, because we do show up in this video here. So farewell to everybody. Check out this last video. See if you can find Mr. Wilcox and Mr. Murphy.
We are live.
So we're going to walk you through everything you need to know, and you're going to have it. And so, may the 4th be with you.
Continuiamo anche il nostro giro per l'Italia.
You Are a Local Lunatic shared this via Twitter. I'm really, really grateful for @JacobsPhysics and @Mr. JB Physics and just @College Board in general for doing so much for these AP exam reviews. I actually get stuff a lot more than I did before COVID happened, and I'm just really, really grateful for that. Smiley face.
All right, so we're talking about the overall big picture of period 4. Here are some things I just want you guys to remember.
KOA shared on TikTok, AP English Zoom streams are my only social interaction right now. #FYP, #isolation, #AP English.
They would send large ships of laborers just to collect the guano and get on the ship. Is collect the right word? Do you mine guano? Do you excavate it? I don't know what the verb is there. I'm supposed to be using.
And we're going to be focusing on tone. Specifically, how do you read and interpret tone?
Karen Tabola Moore on Facebook shared, my students have enjoyed the AP Latin videos with Jeannie Luangu. Since I can only give a live Zoom class twice a week, this has been a great support.
Or I could say I want my lawyer and they have to get me my representation. But, and here's our but for today, that is going to sacrifice the abilities of the community.
Am I sharing the slideshow right now?
Nope. Nope.
If you are, I can't see it.
Utkarsh Kali shared on Twitter, thank you for the helpful AP classes on YouTube. My preparation for AP Calc VC has become so much easier and efficient.
So I drew this like 4 o'clock this morning. So it's not beautiful, but I think it gets the point.
You turn over another card and they get compared and that person would win. Tell me if you do it differently, Mr. Schultz.
Nope.
The more that you can find that connection within yourself, within the character, I feel like you write the character with a lot more depth.
Learning about the economy is important, and I wish more people did what you're doing.
My advice to all the students out there, whatever it is you choose to go into, make sure that it's a passion that burns in your belly.
I learned so much working in local government about public service. It teaches you that it's 24/7 and that you have to learn to listen.
I am someone who believes in following your passion, right? And working hard. And if you kind of find that there's something out there that you think is a need in the market and no one else is making it, then maybe you have to be a little bit creative.
11th grade US history is the reason we're talking, because I don't think I would have picked up Ron Chernow's biography of Alexander Hamilton if I hadn't written a paper on Alexander Hamilton in high school.
Asia K3 shared on Instagram, I'm so glad he came. He's the reason I was able to get more interested in US history, and I always listen to the Hamilton soundtrack when studying for APUSH. Emoji.
We have a message here from Girleen from Instagram. She says, definitely worth waking up before noon.
And so you just connect your battery to your magnet like this, and then you get copper. Ta-da!
Look at that. That's amazing.
When are we ever going to need calculus? You'd be surprised. I mean, you might make videos and then calculate like the breaking pressure of Thanos' abdomen if Ant-Man were inside it.
This one hit close to home. This is very special for me. Mr. Walters teaches in Managua, Nicaragua, and that's where I was born. And I want to say hello to all the students out there.
Lyra Matt tweeted, I watch every AP Lit video. They're so helpful, especially for students whose first language is not English. Ms. Barber and Mr. Carlos' enthusiasm and passion inspired and encouraged me not to give up.
Mire, Julia de Burgos nace, es todo un mito en la littérature caribeña.
Pour souligner encore ce qu'on essaie de faire, on veut expliquer des idées et des opinions.
Mrs. Lowe shared on Twitter, these videos are excellent. They do a great job of reviewing mixed material with an awesome job of presenting new material.
好，下面是 cultural presentation。抱歉让大家坐着哈，但是这个很重要。
今日も一緒に日本語頑張って勉強しましょうよ。はい、それで。
Chanel Kernander said on Twitter, love Mr. Escobar and Miss Barber's videos for my AP Lit students. You two are awesome. Tuning in live from Houston, Texas.
What'd you say for Dabo? Did you answer what that means?
Yeah, future. I will give. Just as Gandalf parted ways with the hobbits before they undertook the scouring of the Shire, the time is almost here for Josh and me to sail into the West.
Thanks for showing up every day and reviewing the course with us. And remember, on the exam, sound like you've taken the course. Be specific and be scientific.
It's been a blast working with you all spring. And like I said, this chapter of your life isn't over. You now have a chance to rewrite.
Thank you so much for watching Mark and me for these last 30, I don't know, however many sessions we had. And if it weren't for you, we wouldn't have had these sessions.
Well, thanks for watching. And one final piece of advice. If the question seems really complicated, it's probably not.
Gracias por haberme acompañado durante estas semanas.
I just want to say thank you to all the amazing AP Statistics students out there that have been following along with us for the past 6 weeks.
Thank you so much for watching. We really appreciate it and hope these videos have helped.
Hearing from you and seeing the pictures that you've sent us of your pets, thank you so much for tuning in.
Thank you to everyone for watching, for tuning in, for continuing your educations. Best of luck on your exams.
You've prepared, you're ready, do your best on this exam, and then congratulate yourself no matter what you get.
Optimum Fortunam Omnibus. Best of luck to everyone.
Thank you for tuning in to all of our AP Bio review lessons and our practice exam.
Bon courage, as we say en français.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Luke and I really had a super fun time, and we hope you learned a lot.
Thank you to all of the AP Chemistry students who watched the videos.
You're good enough, you're smart enough, and gosh darn it, people like you.
Thanks for tuning into all these videos. Music theory friends, don't forget to resolve your tendency tones.
You guys have got this. Remember, you are the solution.
Thank you so much for joining me the past month and a half. It's been such a journey and such a treat for me.
Hey, thanks for watching the last 6 weeks, especially the calculus crew.
You guys are awesome. You are excellent. You are brilliant. I really, really enjoyed our time together, and I know you guys are going to rock that exam next week.
Just remember that you have worked your butts off this year. Y'all are going to do great.
It is time for you to shine.
Type your response, copy it, paste it in the submission box. Good luck.
Hey, arigato. Thank you. Ganbatte kudasai. Remember to practice on the app that comes out next week.
Y'all are going to do great. And remember, geography is everywhere.